It says here, shock, anger, confusion grip Alabama after court ruling on embryos. So I saw this story kind of bouncing around and I thought, well, what's the big deal? What's going on here? Why are people freaking out about some red state ruling on abortion or in this case, it's embryos? But this is a new battlefield that the GOP has picked a fight on. And there's even disagreements within the GOP on how to handle this. My understanding of this is that in vitro fertilization, IVF, is something that's pretty common, but involves the destruction of some embryos. So in order to go through this process, you do end up destroying some embryos in the process. And now the Alabama courts have ruled that those embryos are human lives. And so that's illegal. And that is what the problem is. Let's take a look. Throughout Alabama, there is widespread shock, anger, and confusion over how to proceed after the state Supreme Court ruled Friday that frozen embryos are people, a potentially far-reaching decision that could upend women's reproductive health care in a state that already has one of the nation's strictest abortion laws. Women who actually know what happened, they feel under attack and almost powerless, said Ashley Meyer Dunham, a Birmingham mother who conceived a child through in vitro fertilization and is a partner in a law firm that specializes in assisted reproductive technology cases. First, you had the Dobbs decision, and now this. What does this even mean? So it's just another attack on women and their reproductive rights, essentially. But this time it involves couples and it goes beyond abortion. Now it's about people who are just trying to have a child and using this method, and this is being taken away from them now. So a new battlefield that's going to cost the GOP, in my opinion, but it's important to know what's going on. The state Supreme Court decision signals a new chapter in America's fight over reproductive rights and marks another blow to women's rights groups that expect similar challenges in other conservative states. The ruling is limited to Alabama, but legal experts say it could embolden the personhood movement, which asserts that unborn children should be granted legal rights beginning at conception. Interviews with physicians and attorneys in Alabama, as well as advocates on both sides of the issue nationwide, paint a confusing path forward for IVF clinics trying to interpret the ramifications of the ruling. Although physicians hope the Alabama legislature will limit the impacts of the ruling, they warn that the most dire consequence of the ruling is that some Alabama IVF clinics may be forced to suspend their operations. And even if they remain operational, physicians say patients could have to endure longer and more costly treatments to try to achieve a pregnancy. Under the current Alabama ruling, patients nor physicians nor IVF labs are going to be willing to have frozen embryos, said Mamie McLean, a physician at one of the state's largest fertility clinics, Alabama Fertility Specialist. So if we are faced with two potential embryos that need to be transferred, modern practice would say transfer one and freeze one. But under this ruling, it may not be safe to freeze embryos. So we will be forced to transfer two embryos, which increases the lifelong health risks to both mothers and children. The challenge to IVF in Alabama comes as the number of pregnancies conceived through the procedure has soared over the past decade. According to the CDC, 97,128 infants were born nationwide via IVF in 2021, the last year for which statistics were available. There are 453 IVF clinics nationwide, and every state except Wyoming has at least one clinic. Jennifer Lincoln, a board-certified OBGYN who practices in Portland, Oregon, said she doesn't think people understand how scary the Alabama ruling is. She raised a common scenario. A patient undergoing IVF has an egg retrieval that leads to the creation of multiple embryos, with the hope that at least one turns into a live birth. If successful, the remaining embryos remain frozen for possible future use, but not all may be used. If someone has 5 embryos left and they decide not to have any more kids and want those embryos destroyed, and someone in that physician office hears that, could the doctor be criminalized for being an accomplice in a crime? The Alabama ruling is the first to attribute human rights to a developing organism at such an early stage following conception. The ruling states that unborn children are children, and that frozen embryos should be afforded the same protection as babies under the wrongful death of a minor act. Well, I don't think I have to weigh in my personal opinion on this, but this seems like it's going a bit far, eh? I mean, this is a method used to have children by a lot of people, 91,000 plus people in 2021. And if you cannot destroy the other embryos because you don't want more children, then that's going to stop this method of having children from being used. And there's going to be a lot of sad people out there. And like they said, that this is just the first state to do this. Now, this is probably going to be taken up by a bunch of other states now. Katie O'Connor, director of federal abortion policy at the National Women's Law Center, says the ruling will immediately disrupt reproductive care in Alabama because hospitals and doctors will be unclear about what they can and can't do in terms of fertility treatments. Doctors are going to decide that these questions surrounding fertility treatments are not easily answerable and that the work is just too risky to do with the state, said O'Connor, who predicted the Alabama decision will probably inspire anti-abortion activists to push for similar protections in other states. McLean, the Alabama doctor, cautions she is not yet ready to accept the worst-case scenario that would result in clinics closing and patients being forced to receive treatment in other states. She expects Alabama's medical community will be able to work with legislators and judges to carve out a middle ground that enables IVF treatments to continue. Still, McLean blasted the ruling, saying it was not grounded in medicine. Unfortunately, this has become a political debate, but in reality, this is a medical debate and how we are able to practice medical care as physicians. If no concessions to the court ruling are made, McLean said it could cost Alabama women more money because some doctors might only be willing to retrieve a limited number of eggs. In a typical IVF cycle, doctors stimulate the ovaries to produce as many mature eggs as possible. Those eggs are then fertilized in a lab and, if successful, turn into embryos. Multiple embryos are often needed to produce a single live birth. If we are to say, okay, I can fertilize 2 eggs instead of 10, we may not end up with any embryos or end up with an unhealthy embryo, so patients may need multiple egg retrievals to achieve the same pregnancy rate that we were trying to achieve with one retrieval, McLean said. Multiple attempts at retrieval will cost more money. McLean added she worries insurance companies could balk at those costs. She also worries that medical malpractice costs could go up and that it will become harder to attract physicians to the state. So yes, there is a scenario where this closes fertility clinics in the state, but we remain hopeful and absolutely expect a different path forward. Dunham, the Birmingham attorney, is even more pessimistic about the implications of the ruling. She noted that an online infertility support group she is a part of is already buzzing with discussion from Alabama couples about how to ship their frozen embryos out of state. Costs about $1,500 to mail the embryos to labs in Georgia or another state. But Dunham noted that many labs elsewhere are already facing strains on their storage capacities. On Tuesday, Dunham said she was also fielding questions from divorce attorneys about whether settlement agreements that call for the destruction of a couple's embryos can remain valid. The decision could also have implications for genetic testing of embryos, she said. Many patients rely on screening embryos to identify and prevent passing along genetic conditions. Such testing can also identify which embryos have a normal number of chromosomes and are less likely to result in a miscarriage. If someone has a recurrent miscarriage, it could be due to a genetic disorder. You end up creating multiple embryos, and they usually genetically test to see which one has the best chance of making it. But if you say these are children and they can't be destroyed, we're looking at maybe not being able to test it because it could hurt the embryo. Even outside of Alabama, the ruling is causing an additional stress for IVF patients already undergoing an anxiety-inducing process. Audra Stark, 40 years old, has an 8-month-old daughter she conceived through IVF and calls it one of the most mentally traumatic experiences of her life. The Virginia mother went through the process 3 years ago after her physician told her she wasn't able to ovulate and ended up freezing 4 embryos in hopes of growing her family. When she heard about the Alabama news, Stark said she immediately wondered which state would follow. It's scary because I think it's going to be like dominoes falling. I think it's going to be like abortion restrictions where we're going to see huge swaths of the country without access to these services. So this is going beyond abortion now. This is a new battlefield for the pro-life crowd. So not really much to say about this. I don't know anything about IVF. As per the article here, a lot of people depend on this, and it does destroy embryos in the process. And I thought we want to encourage people to have families, not discourage them. And there's 2 things that are negative here. One, doctors don't want to practice this, so it's going to cut down the options for people being able to have a family who otherwise wouldn't be able to if they don't have the facilities and the clinics and the doctors around to do it. Then that's going to stop people from growing their family or having a family in the first place through no fault of their own. And number 2, the cost. It becomes more costly to go through this process, and then that slows down people from having families. So again, I thought we want to encourage people to have families in order to solve our nation's problems.
I hope the IVF ruling is enough to push voters over the edge.
Yeah, I wonder, Alec, because this is a whole new group of people that are going to get upset at the GOP for their pro-life movement, saying, what the hell, man? Abortion is one thing, right? Maybe some of these people are on board with the abortion message, like, you know what, that you shouldn't use that as a means of contraception, which I don't think people are doing, but that's the argument. This is probably going to upset some otherwise pro-life people that, hey, man, what are you doing? This is an abortion. I can't have a kid. I'm very against abortion, and I would never, ever support anyone having one, but I can't have a kid any other way, and or my daughter can't have a kid, and her family's going to use this process, and now you're going to remove this option? Now they're going to be on our side. They're going to say, you know what? I'm not a Democrat. I don't support Democrats. I'm against everything Joe Biden stands for. He's a sleepy old man who's going to destroy the country, but my side is dead wrong on this issue, and I don't want to see this option taken away from people. So it definitely seems like a misstep by the GOP here, continuing to go in the wrong direction. Who doesn't love a good old-fashioned theocracy? True. What's next? No more yanking? Well, they're trying to outlaw Pornhub, right? Good news for democracy, as this will turn out a whole new wave of voters who otherwise might not be engaged. Yeah, I do think this galvanizes a group of people who have been on the sidelines, right? If 91,000 plus families have used this fertilization method in 1 year, back in 2021, then that's a lot of people. And it's not just the individuals impacted by it, but the families and the friends who say, wait a second now, this has gone way too far. But this is fallout from the pro-life movement pushing things too far. And I agree, the political ramifications are favorable for us on the left. Sucks for people that have to deal with this right now, but this will get some people off the sidelines, just like other issues have, like the Stoneman Douglas shooting in Florida got a lot of young people to start joining politics and marching, right, with the March for Our Lives. And that led to people like Maxwell Frost getting involved, and now he's a member of Congress. So stuff like this has a way of getting people involved. I think that's a very positive way to look at it.